nobody else can sit on the executive team and talk about the product needs, right? That is something that only the product leader can do. The product leader needs to be deep in strategy. They need to be understanding what's going on with customers. Do they need to be the ones picking out a particular tool? Do they need to be the ones who are trying to fix this meeting? That's something that and so then, a lot of leaders say, yeah, I don't need to be doing that. I'm going to delegate that down.
Welcome everybody to the Talking Roadmaps channel, the channel where we talk everything roadmaps. But in series 2, we're going to explore some other really important areas of product management and product in general. Product operations is a massively important thing, and it's something that's probably been as old as product management, but never really got a name and the focus that it deserves now. And my special guest today, Jenny, is going to talk to us a lot more about product operations. Jenny, please introduce yourself.
Oh, so much for having me. My name is Jenny Wanger. I am a product coach, product operations coach and consultant, and I partner with product leaders who are trying to build out a high-performing product culture. So that's really where my passion lies.
If you're enjoying the channel, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and give us a like. We start with, I guess, a core question, Jenny, which is, why do companies need product operations?
And what I'm alluding to your introduction, product operations has always existed because product management has always existed, right? Product operations is just the how you build your product. So as opposed to, thinking about, there's the strategy and there's the what we're building, and then there's the how we're going to build it. And that's where product operations lives. So the answer is every organization that's ever had product management as a discipline also has product operations. It's just historically, it's been considered part of the responsibilities of product leadership. What we're seeing now is the leadership going, oh my goodness, I'm totally overwhelmed. I need more time, right? Like I can't do this and that and that and that. And that one of the things that's easiest to pull out of the role of and responsibilities of product leadership and give to a different discipline, to a different person, is product operations. And so that's the pattern we're really seeing now, is just a division of the role, a division of labor, to have some people who are focusing on the infrastructure that's going to be building out your product culture, and other people focusing on the strategy and the what we're building.
That makes sense. And I think as part of my job as a tooling implementer, I'm either working with product managers who are taking on the operations role of implementing and rolling out tools, or I'm working directly with product operations teams. Again, it depends on the organization, the scale of them. And as I start to work with companies and they are growing their tool adoption, they're starting to identify the need that actually sometimes that tool ownership, as well as many other aspects of product operations, deserve a full-time role or even a team. So it's really great to see that kind of evolving within the organizations. How do you see product ops set up across different organizations? In fact, is it a separate team or different reporting lines? What's been typical?
And then typical, right? The vast majority of companies are still using the classical model of having product operations folded into the product management leadership and product managers' responsibilities, right? Where they are managing their own, they're managing their own tools and just choosing on how, thinking differently about that. We've to actually, create the infrastructure versus the other work they're doing. And so it's that split responsibility. Then, there's a lot of companies I'm seeing right now are sort of doing the product ops trial, where they've brought on one person and said, you're now product ops, good luck, go. And that one person then is sort of, they don't have that team. And so these actually, I think, one of the most challenging setups to do, because how does that one individual figure out what to do? They don't have, they don't necessarily have colleagues in the same way, and they're having to, make up the definition of the role as they go along. And then there are companies now that, I'm seeing more and more of them that are actually building out full product operations teams. As the company grows, right, the more and more product managers you have, the more complicated the operations get. And so having a team to support that can be a real high leverage investment for a company. But ultimately, it's all just different strategies on how to get to the same goal of your high performing product team. And so that's not necessarily, that I would say every company should go with, one path or another. It's much more about picking the right path for that particular thing and what they're trying to achieve.
It makes sense. It completely depends. If it's a small company versus a large company, how mature their product management operations is, how much change their product management function maybe needs to evolve to from a feature team through to an empowered team. I think it absolutely depends. But that role is important and is being done just in various ways, and that is evolving. You mentioned around product operations sitting within product management. Have there ever been cases where product management has sat adjacent to it and they've reported into different functions? How does that work within different companies, or what does that look like?
So usually if product operations isn't reporting into product management, it's reporting into the COO. So it's on the operations side of the business. Report companies they'll call it S&O, a strategy and operations department. And so product ops will report in that way. That's another strategy that I've seen. It generally leads to a lot more cross-functional collaboration, right? Sales ops will also be in there, marketing ops, right? And so you've got all of the different DevOps less often, I think, into the COO, because DevOps is actually that, right? There's engineering ops, there's DevOps, there's SREs. And so it's sort of a little bit more complicated there. But the idea being that, and have different ops functions across the org, they're all trying to sort of smooth out the operations of the company and how people are collaborating. And so having them be all reporting on the same team and thinking about the same initiatives can sometimes be, another strategy to take. One other model I've seen is actually tech ops, where you do put engineering, design, and product ops all together as one function. Sometimes it's just the title is tech ops. Times the title, you'll have sort of, I've seen sort of it's like a trio, a product trio, but it's an ops trio. That's, there's a huge variety across.
That's really interesting. I mean, I haven't been close enough to product operations to kind of ask that question to an expert, but it makes sense to me because, again, it depends on so much of the context of the organization. You mentioned product operations sometimes sitting under the COO. Does product ops help in the organization? Is it just product management, or is it much bigger than that?
I think the primary customer of product ops has to be product, right? But product doesn't work on its own in any way, shape, or form. And product has a duty to serve the rest of the company, right? So as product is interfacing with the go-to-market teams, with engineering, with all with design, ops needs to make sure that all of those lines of communication, all of those partnerships are working well. And so, a great example is that product ops is often, I've actually seen quite a few people in product ops come in via customer support. And that's because a lot of times product ops is brought in because the product leader says, well, we've got all of this great data in customer support on how our product is functioning, and we're not doing a strong enough job of bringing that in to our own work. So can we bring in product ops, and their initial function is just going to be to get that feedback loop closed. What are customers saying about our product? Can we make sure we're using that data? Can we then also reply to the customers and make sure that they know when we fixed their problem, right? Or that we can follow up for more research. And so that's a great example of where, if product ops were just serving product management and they just tell customer support, now you've got to go do this and we expect that, and it's going to fall apart, right? So product ops needs to be serving the customer, and customer support wants that too, right? So that two-way street, and making sure product ops is thinking about the needs both of their primary user and then that secondary user is critical.
Absolutely. Having been a senior customer success manager myself, I can absolutely relate to that. And ironically, it was a road mapping tool that I was part of the CSM team too. But yeah, it's keeping those things closer. I guess maybe even a wider question is, what are the key responsibilities of product operations? That's just one of them. But is there an easy way for us to say there's 4 or 5 main responsibilities, or does that also depend?
So the way that I look at it is that product ops is primary responsibility is to ensure that to help the product team move towards a desired product culture and to fix it. What the work of that actually entails is going to be huge variety across every company, because right, this is a strategy question. It's, here's the culture we want, and what are the things that are standing between us and that? And so then how do I, as product ops, fill that in? Sometimes it might be that, we need a road mapping tool, right? Sometimes it might be we need to get better at synthesizing customer feedback. It might just be like, we need to make sure that engineering doesn't spend an hour trying to figure out if these are the most updated design files or not. It could, right? Like there's, the small things and the big things.
And it feels like it needs to be quite a consultative role. If product operations starts to get involved in business as usual, then it's not a good thing. I understand it really needs to come in, own improvements, but not be part of the process. Would you say that was accurate?
I have seen product ops teams where they are embedded within an individual product team in order to help things move forward. I have seen this work especially well, I would say, in two different cases. So one is highly regulated, so healthcare and finance. And there it's very helpful because those things, all of these boxes that you need to check in order to get through the regulation, right? You need to make sure that legal and compliance reviews have happened, that, maybe you've run betas and you've proved this and you've got that going, and fire a marketing review. Like there's just sort of all of this extra work that needs to be done such that the product manager there is just no way for them to accomplish it on their own here. So there I've seen product ops used as an actual operations type role in a different sense, right? So as opposed to sort of the leveraged operation, leverage smoothing out the saying, let's just like we need more help getting stuff done. And then each of those operations people who are embedded across different teams are thinking also about how do we automate this away? How do we get this work? So they are still thinking at that level of how do we make this into high leverage? But at the same time, these teams just really need somebody who's able to help them get stuff done. So I have seen that, and so highly regulated is one side of that. The other side where I've seen that be very helpful is on one of these where there's a very high degree of real world to real world to digital world interaction. So food delivery is a prime example of this, where you have this huge operations side that's like literal, I need to get your dinner from a restaurant into a driver's hands and then to your house. Right? There's so many different things that can go wrong in the real world. And so the operations person is actually trying to preempt that. It's like perhaps it's, they're doing, so as product changes happen, the product ops person is actually thinking about, okay, what are the implications for trust and safety with this? What are the operational implications, right? Like if we, if we add this data and send it to the restaurant, are they going to get confused by it?
Makes sense. There's a lot more when you expand on it like that to consider. What's the collaboration then between product ops and product management? Can there be any frictional overlap? Because you've just described kind of sometimes product ops becomes embedded. Is it clear for them to be able to define clear roles and responsibilities?
So there are definitely, there's a long and storied history of product managers who have heard that product ops is coming and gotten tutorial about it. I think that when the roles are defined correctly, there shouldn't be a lot of confusion, right? Especially when you have that product ops team thinking about in that enabling role, right? The product manager should be thrilled that product ops has shown up because it's taking stuff off their plate. It's figuring out how to, they're going to make their jobs easier. Where the friction comes is when product ops becomes the process police in that side, right? And product managers go, here comes product ops and they're just going to make me fill out more forms and jump through more hoops and go to more meetings. If that's the case, then you're doing product ops wrong. Because there should always be there should always be value, a clear enough value to what you're doing and implementing that that people actually want it to. So that's one side of it. And then I think, when you've got that embedded model, that's where I do see the danger of product ops danger is probably too strong a word, but I see product ops sometimes becoming a shadow second PM, right? Because they're now starting to, some companies, the product ops, they're looking at all, the data that's coming in from the operational side of the business, and they're starting to synthesize that data and say like, okay, well, here's where a user need is, right? Or like, here's and they're starting to pull together, strategy and things. But I would actually then in those cases look at it much more as like, great, you've got somebody else on your team helping you figure out a good product strategy and like thinking about a different side of the business that may be, right? Like you've got this very large mandate to handle and very complicated product, and they're there to help you as a product manager succeed. And so, welcome the assistance, welcome the support. I don't know many product managers who are like, what I need more work.
Well, so true. And that's why, when you were talking about, some of the ownership and things, some of the teams that I'm working with, especially when they don't have product operations, and I'm showing product managers how to use this tool, how to train this tool, how to configure this tool. It can, in large implementations, as you know, with any tool, start to become a full-time job, and it starts to load them down. And so it's, I cringe a little bit when I'm sharing this with them. Obviously, I'm trying to make their job easier. But I guess that might lead into a really good question next, I hope, which is how do you justify having product ops, and where does that start?
And comes back right to that idea of essentially how much work in progress can any individual person have going on? Right. So as a product leader, I am worried about my, the roadmap and the strategy, right? I am having to manage my peers across other departments and work with them and get, and that relationship building. I have my list of direct reports who I'm mentoring. I'm having to keep an eye on what all the releases are and know what's going on. And then, I've got to also make sure that we've got the right tooling processes and everything in place so that my reports can all be successful. Just on this, like maybe the expectation is they can do it, right? Maybe they can, but juggling that many things in your brain, that many priorities, it's really hard for all of them to come out well. And so that's where we get these managers who are right, they're firefighting and they're going over here and they're trying to fix that and they're letting all of those things slide while that's going on. But because they let all those things slide, there's now a fire over here. And so lo and behold, if you can say, let's take one of these things off of your plate. We don't expect product leaders to also be working with product teams to build stuff, right? Even if they do, they're very talented at that. Do we expect them to also be handling the operational side of their departments? And so it's really just it's adding cognitive load. And the more that we can remove some of that from the leadership, the more that they're going to be able to focus on the things that only they can do, right? Because guess what? Nobody else can sit on the executive team and talk about the product needs, right? That is something that only the product leader can do. The product leader needs to be deep in strategy. They need to be understanding what's going on with customers. Do they need to be the ones picking out a particular tool? Do they need to be the ones who are trying to fix this meeting? That's something that and so then, a lot of leaders say, yeah, I don't need to be doing that. I'm going to delegate that down. And so they say, hey, and this is how I got started in product ops, right? Is that my CPO came to me and he was like, we need a road mapping process that can actually allow us to have all of our, we're trying to make allocation decisions for how many engineers to put across teams. And right now, everybody's submitting a different roadmap and it's really hard for the executive team to understand that and we can't compare things. I need you to fix this. And so, he put this on my shoulders and that was my introduction to product ops. And I loved it, right? Turns out I loved it and it was great. But it was also, I call it shadow product ops work, because guess what? When my performance review came around, there wasn't a thanks so much for leading that road mapping initiative. That was really great. It was what's going on with your product. How did you deliver on all of, on your user needs, on your KPIs? And so again, it was one of these things where like I'd put in that work and I hadn't really gotten like full credit for it. So as a product manager, right, how am I supposed to prioritize the road mapping initiative if that's not something that I'm really going to be getting that much credit for, right? And again, right here I am trying to work with my engineers and designers and talk to customers. And now you want me to also be doing this cross-functional thing with my peers. And again, right, like it's adding that extra cognitive load, that extra work in progress.
Especially if that doesn't necessarily translate to something strategic that then everybody's talking about. And that's the challenge I've found. It feels like it fits into the same sorts of things as technical debt and bug fixes and things like that. It's almost like this is essential work that we need to do, but because it doesn't align to strategy, it's missed off of your objectives, or it's missed off of your end of year review, or it's missed off of us even recognizing it as a business of the things that we've done. And so that's really hard to hear.
Well, there I'm going to actually, so this is something I think that's actually like a massively misunderstood thing about product ops, right? Is when people say, oh, it doesn't connect to strategy. And so, right, what I have here is I have something called the product ops strategy stack, and it's built off of, Ravi Mehta built out the product strategy stack for Reforge, and I took it and adapted it to product ops. But I think it's actually, if you don't think that product ops is part of achieving your strategy, then you're looking at product ops too simplistically, right? It's not processes and tools. It is product ops is actually a strategy enabler. So when I talk about the product ops strategy stack, right, it starts with the product culture you're trying to build, right? That's your vision, that's your mission. And mind you, right, like all what I'm saying here is just simply, well, why don't we take a product mindset and apply it to product operations, right? That's what's going on here. And then the answer is that then the next question is, okay, and what's your product strategy? Because that's actually a critical piece to then deciding what your product ops strategy should be. Your product ops strategy shouldn't be just like, oh, well, great product teams have this, and so we should have it. It should be, what do we need as a company? And I'll share a story about this in a minute. To illustrate it, right? So what's your product ops strategy, and how does that help you achieve your product strategy? And your roadmap then comes out of that, and you set your goals based essentially on the pieces of your roadmap, right? Did we actually solve the user problems, right? The company problems that we were trying to solve. And so if you're not looking at this from a strategic standpoint, if you're not thinking about how is product ops actually moving the company strategy forward, then yeah, why would you have product ops? How could you justify that?
That's such a great response, and thank you for sharing that visual. But that was really powerful. So Jenny, please continue with that.
Yeah, and so an example of what this actually looks like in action when product ops can be that strategy enabler is that I had somebody I was coaching, and I'll call her Emma, and her head of product came to her. She was running the product ops team and said, I want to know, like, what's your vision? What's the future of product ops at this organization? And she had jumped into features. She was like, oh, well, we could fix this intake form and we need to tweak that and like all of this. And the product ops leader came back, or the product leader came back and was like, no, but like, what's your strategy? Not the list of things you're going to do, right? Very classic, product manager jumps right into solutions. And so that was when she called me and she was like, I need help doing this. And so we talked about it, and I went to her and I walked her through the strategy stack, right? And that was what we did together. I said, okay, but what's the product strategy right now? And she said, oh, well, here's what it is. Like, we've got these 3 pillars and like these things going on. And I said, okay, and where in these pillars can you help? What problems are the teams facing where they're going to struggle to get this product strategy executed because they don't have the right infrastructure in place? And one of the pieces of this strategy that was about customer sentiment, right? They were seeing sort of declining customer satisfaction scores, and there was a sense of, their clients were sort of saying like, yeah, we don't know that you guys really have our best interests, right? Like, and they were trying to stop that and, turn it the other way. And she said, oh, well, I could help with that because we have this, we've got one thing that's going, this tool that customers can use to submit their feedback to us. And right now we're not doing a good job of closing the loop and taking that, right? Like, we're not using that data. We've got 3,000. They actually had 3,000 ideas submitted by customers and by customer success managers that had not been looked at. And she was like, I could fix that. And I said, excellent. So what you are actually doing is you are creating the tool, right? You are putting in place the tooling needed to achieve this piece of your product strategy, right? To turn that customer satisfaction around, because that is a critical element right now of what they're trying to do. And you have the ability to do that. And and it was this moment of connecting the dots that product ops is not just like checking in, it's not ticking things off a list, right? Product ops is achieving a particular strategy that you need in order to make sure your product strategy succeeds.
I love that. And just everything you're saying there, I'm kind of relating to. When I'm implementing, tools, there are sometimes idea portals that are available, and the product teams get really excited. But what ends up happening sometimes, the tool is only 20% of the problem, the rest of it is the processes and the behaviors around it. You can set up an idea portal or a feedback portal, but if you capture 3,000 ideas or pieces of feedback and do nothing with it, you've actually created yourself more of a problem. And so I totally relate to that. So it's great to hear that thinking. And like you said, tying it back up to that product strategy. I suspect that was a light bulb moment.
It really was. And I think that it allowed her, it got her product leader to trust her, right? Because she was saying, I see what you are most concerned about, and I am most concerned about that too. Right. And it wasn't her going off and being like, oh, bells and whistles and, cool things here. And to your point, about the tool being 20% of it, that's absolutely correct, right? Like they had configured this tool and it was beautiful and it had the right questions on it, and what they had forgotten to think about was in the product development lifecycle, where are the points where the product manager would ever log into this tool and look at what was in there. And they hadn't actually built that out, right? And they hadn't actually thought about the processes. They hadn't actually thought about the workflows. How do product managers get alerted that they've got something to look at in the tool, right? The final thing I'll say here is also of like on these idea portals, right? One of the mistakes I've seen over and over again is the product ops person saying, oh, well, I'll do the first pass and categorize everything, and then that will assign it to the product manager so that they know what to look at. And that's not scalable, right? That's one of these things where that traps the product ops person in doing a manual task that doesn't actually add that much leverage to the team, right? So it's much more, so there's one of you and there's 8 of them. So don't put it on your shoulders to be the one to do all of this work, right? Like, how do you make it so that they can figure it out, so that it's in their workflows and they're actually taking lead on it, but you're making it easier for them to do so.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that sounds like that's probably a common mistake that people might make in product operations, is to embed themselves into some form of BAU that's then taking extra time away from them from being able to do the consultative improvements that they might be trying to do.
Yeah, Christine Utuaro calls it automate yourself out of the job, right? That's really like the mindset for product operations. If you're always thinking about, okay, how do I make it so that this isn't my job anymore? So I don't have to be the one going in and tagging everything, right? So that's automated. How do I, get out of the middle of it so that I can continue to, right? And every time you automate something in the organization, that means that the work is less for everybody, right? So it's back to that those high leverage activities that really add a lot of value.
So good, so good. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the good and the bad of product operations. So what do you consider to be maybe a best practice in product ops?
The best practice in product ops is bringing that product mindset to it, right? That's to me like the number one thing that I'm constantly saying over and over and over again is, so one example of this is somebody recently asked me, they said, I'm trying to fix engagement at this meeting with it's a cross-functional meeting where we're talking about what's coming up for the company, and engagement's just really low. So I'm trying to fix it. And I said, well, why do you need to fix engagement? She said, well, people aren't coming and doing the work ahead of time. I'm like, and why does that matter? Right. And so asking those whys, right? Like, why is this a problem? Going through all of those things. And, and then she was like, oh, well, maybe I could do this, or starting to ideate, right? And I was like, wait a second. What did the meeting attendees say? What? And I'm like, have you asked anybody why they're showing up and not engaging? Are they getting value from this meeting? Or are they just showing up and oh, geez, this is the product meeting again, but I got to show, and right? What's their attitude? What do they want to get out of it? And, and it was sort of that light bulb moment of, oh yeah, these are my users. I should go and talk to them, right? I should interview them, figure out what their needs are, and then create a solution, right? I can redesign this meeting to actually fit their needs. And if I can do that, then yes, the engagement will follow because you have created something of value, right? We sometimes forget that with our coworkers, since they're rather compelled to show up to stuff, right? with customers, they will churn if they don't like your product. Your coworkers don't have the luxury of churning. So they might hate your product, but they're still they're going to show up and they're just going to grumble behind your back.
So yeah, I'm laughing because I'm agreeing with you because it's so true. It's so relatable to some of the things that I've seen. So that's brilliant. I guess, do you have a pet hate to see with product ops, or maybe an anti-pattern that you can think of?
The anti-pattern is product ops as tool manager, right? Where, I'm sure you've seen this a ton. Somebody comes to you and they're like, we need a road mapping tool. And you're like, okay, why? And they're like, because we need a road mapping tool, right? And then they say, and this person's going to be in charge. And right. And so now like that person, so that poor product ops person is now, they are the administrator of the road mapping tool and Jira and list out 5 different other things. And that's the entirety of their systems administrator, right? And is that really adding much, you've shoved them back into the IT box. And are they adding that much value if they're pretty much just managing configurations of workflows? Like not, back to like, where is the product mindset in that? You have forced them into a position where they, they have to really work in order to, if you slap their wrist every time they say, well, but what about the, workflows around this? And what about this and that? And you say your job is the tool administrator, like that, that's a crappy job.
Yeah, it's handcuffed them from what product ops is about, right? It's going back to system admin and you're just looking after users and custom fields. That's
not adding value to the company, and that's not adding value to their career. So I would say that's, one of the most concerning anti-patterns I see.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Let's bring it back to a little bit about road mapping, because we've talked about that as well previously. But what's product operations involvement in road mapping?
Yeah, so I've seen, again, right, it runs the gamut. In some organizations, product ops is actually the one who is facilitating road mapping from the beginning to the end. So they are, it's planning season, let's go. And they're hosting the meetings and actually, sitting down with product managers to make sure that they've got their roadmaps and chasing everybody and working through it, and doing the whole shebang. And in other companies, they have nothing to do with it whatsoever. And that's right. Road mapping remains fully within it's one of the product operations tasks that remains fully within product leadership. So it really, there's a full range to it. And I think it comes back again to what is your what do you need? What is the thing that's keeping you from having the product culture you need? And sometimes road mapping is part of that, and sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, it is. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, which is, do you need a roadmap for your product operations function? I think we've seen this already, but I'm going to ask you the question.
And this is another one of those mistakes I see product operations do, is they're not thinking about it, their roadmap is maybe just a list of like, well, we're going to fix this tool and then we're going to go look at that meeting and we're going to, it's I call it the whack-a-mole approach. And this is actually usually that comes from product leadership, because one of the things that I've seen, right, where product operations comes from, product leadership says, oh, I'm overwhelmed, I've got too many things to do. And then there's all of this product ops stuff. So I'll bring in a product ops manager and I'll give them these things. And so they product ops manager comes and the leader says, hooray. I had somebody in one of my courses who was in this position and told me essentially this story, right? But I've heard it over and over again. And his manager said to him, I'm so glad you're here. Here's the list of everything I want to get done. And it was like a year and a half worth of work. I mean, it was just a tremendous list of, all of the ideas that this leader had ever had. And so, he's that product ops single manager, right? So he doesn't have peers, and his boss is saying, here's the list of things I want you to do. And so he's like, okay, I'll start doing them. And about 6 months in, he's, getting through the list and he's like, okay, I'm doing well. And it sort of comes up to like, the manager's then like, okay, so what are your KPIs anyway? And he's like, I don't know. I got these things done on the list. And the manager wasn't pushing back, but he was like, it felt really unsatisfying because I didn't have a good answer. And so he actually then and this was about when he was in my course, right? And so, he was, we were talking about exactly this, and he put a pause on it. He said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to come up with my strategy and have my roadmap actually be, what are the things that could move this strategy forward that's going to support the product strategy. And he went back and did that reset and went to his boss and he was like, so I know you had this whole list of things you wanted me to do, but I'm not going to do them because they're not going to help. And he was terrified that his boss was going to blow up. I hired you to do these things and how dare you? And believe it or not, that didn't happen, right? His boss was pretty thrilled. Like, oh, this makes sense, right? Like, I see what you're thinking. I see where you're going. And so, yeah, an ops strategy, I think, is critical. And the other thing I'll add to that is one of my biggest recommendations to product ops people is to put their roadmap in the same format and use the same systems and tools and whatever that the product managers are using. Don't be a special snowflake. You actually, and it's a form of dog fooding, right? Because product ops is usually in charge of the road mapping system. And so if you're struggling to build your roadmap, if you're going through the same process they're going through and you're like, this is terrible, guess whose job it is to fix it? It's your job. And so I think it's really, a lot of times product ops is like, oh, well, but I'm not product. Like, I'm not going to put my roadmap on their board because that's going to be confusing. And the answer is no, you absolutely use the same systems because you need to make sure that you have empathy with your users. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to go through the same processes and steps and rules and everything that they're doing. So have a roadmap, right? If product's expected to have a strategy document, have a strategy document. Whatever tool they're using for that, use it. Whatever format they're using. You might need to, fund, there might not be a clear ROI section, right? There might be some things that don't perfectly correspond because your product is different. But use all of the same tools, use all of the same systems they're using, have the same things in place because, you have that product mindset and show it.
Love that. I feel the passion coming through and I can feel it myself because it just absolutely makes sense to me. So it's such a great response. Jenny, you've got a wealth of knowledge. I'm curious, whose advice on product ops do you listen to? Do you listen to, or are there any resources that you could recommend people listening to go and check out?
The first resource I'll recommend is, I do have a newsletter. And so I write about all of this stuff, hopefully with the same passion that I have here. And that's, you can subscribe to that at jennywanger.com. And so that's one thing that I do recommend people who are looking for product ops advice and wisdom. And then there's a couple of communities that I participate in that are really helpful in terms of their ability to just the wealth of knowledge in them. So there's the Product-Led Alliance and Product Ops HQ, which are both really excellent Slack communities and active. And I'm involved with both of them. And then, yeah. I'd say, there's a lot of fantastic product ops people out there who are sharing their thoughts. Chris Compton, Chris Butler. Not all of them are named Chris. Mei Wang is fantastic. There's a long list of great product ops people, and I know I'm leaving a whole bunch out here.
I guess I'd like to kind of wrap things up with maybe just a couple of questions, which is, if you had to distill your philosophy of product operations into a couple of sentences, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so this is funny because I actually recently wrote an article called "The Product Ops Identity Crisis." Because I was sitting in a meetup and there was sort of this, similar to your questions, right? Like, does everybody do product ops the same? Should we do product ops the same? And so we went around the room and everybody said what their scope was for product ops. And it was everything from I handle nothing but launch readiness, right? It's mostly just me making sure that the go-to-market teams know what we're building and know when it's coming. And other people who were like, yeah, I do everything from, ideation and road mapping and customer feedback to launch readiness to this, to that. It was all over the place. And I was sitting there and I was thinking okay, so do we know what product ops is? Is that a problem? And so I actually, I ended up sort of thinking through when people ask me what is product ops, how do I answer? And right, even from this conversation, you can hear how many different definitions of product ops I used throughout the conversation. And so I actually came up with 4 definitions that I find I use most frequently or hear the most frequently. And I think about, so product managing the product management experience, right? Which we've talked a lot about that, right? Bringing that product mindset to the work you're doing and making sure that you're empowering and enabling the product managers. Denise Tillis and Melissa Perry in their books say it's helping product scale well, right? So how do you make sure the product function is growing and scaling successfully? I talked about product strategy enablement, right? That you've got a product strategy and it's your job to make sure that you're getting to the right strategy, that you are actually putting in place the right infrastructure to achieve that product strategy. And then I also talk a ton about designing product culture, right? So making sure that you have a product culture that you think is going to make your company most successful, and that you as product ops are actually the ones who are designing your way there, that are making that product culture a reality. And so there are a lot of, there are a whole bunch of definitions that are also not on this list. And there's, nothing wrong with other definitions as well. But the thing that I actually like about having multiple definitions is that you can sort of take whichever one you need at the moment and use that to guide your work. And then, right, this sort of gives you the full three-dimensional view of what product operations is or could be at an organization, as opposed to saying like product ops is this one thing. Having multiple definitions, I called it an identity crisis. I don't think it's that's probably more clickbaity than it needs to be, or maybe that it's good that we have an identity crisis, because if we knew exactly what we were and we could explain it in one sentence or in one simple way, then it would be really uninspiring, right? If I could, if I could explain product management in one sentence, it wouldn't be a very fun role for me. So I appreciate that product ops as well is hard to define.
Yeah, for sure. And it depends on the context and everything that the company needs it to be. Jenny, you've really helped to expand my mind on the topic, and I've loved speaking with you. I think a lot of what you've said and shown will have resonated with our audience. If they want to find out more, how can they best get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I mentioned my website before, jennywanger.com, which is where you can find my writing, and there's a contact form, and I would love to hear from listeners or viewers and what you thought of this. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is a great way to find me. If you do want to work together, right, there are several different things I do. So I do one-on-one coaching and advising. Oftentimes that's with product leaders who don't have product ops and are trying to figure out how to think about it in a structured way, how to develop a product ops strategy and actually move their product operations forward, whether or not they have that team, but they want to level things up and invest in that in their own way. Or sometimes with product operations leaders who need that support on building out that strategy. I run product operations assessments, so I can come in and say, here's where you're at on various levels. And then I teach courses on product ops and business case development. And those, if you want to learn more about those, I'll send the links over. But I also talk about them both on my newsletter and LinkedIn.
All that leaves me to say is thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And it just leaves me to say thank you so much for coming on and talking product operations with me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you're doing the work to try and move product ops and move product management forward. Because, every team deserves to operate at their full potential.
Oh, do you know what? That might even be the title of this episode. Thank you, Jenny.
Take care.